It's the 4th of July, for crying out loud.
Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. It's July 4th, 2021. We want to thank Clinton Ignatoff for telling me what the date is today. Thank you, Clinton.
No problem. From Canada to you.
I'm glad someone knows what's going around here. And Dillon Bustin, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. The first question, Dillon, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, let's see. Thomas Jefferson said the pursuit of happiness.
Oh, I like that. That is a nice one. Dillon, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, television.
Really? That is a great answer. Let's just give a little perspective on that for a second. What age did you start watching TV?
About 2 years ago.
Wait a minute.
Let me tell you what I mean.
Okay.
I've always been an enthusiastic reader.
Yeah.
However, I've been developing glaucoma, which makes reading difficult. So since my eyesight has started to fail, I have been watching more CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. So I'm in terms of news information, I don't subscribe to a newspaper anymore, but I do occasionally buy the Boston Globe at the supermarket. I'm just habituated to have that with breakfast. However, I mostly read the headlines and look at the photos.
That is so articulate and fun, Dillon, because McLuhan said that people get it. Reading the newspaper in the morning is like getting in a warm bath. You have your coffee and your newspaper and you're like that. But in essence, just to clarify, you're saying your favorite form of information previous to 2 years was probably reading.
Yes, reading.
Yeah. And so did you pick up reading because your parents were telling you to? They were an example, or on your own?
My parents were not an example except implicitly. In this sense, in my father's bedroom closet on the top shelf were about 5 books, which included the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, the Walden, A Tale of Two Cities, and The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. There was one more of it, which I can't quite recall at the moment. And so my father's closet was completely off limits. You know, the kids were not allowed to go into the parents' closets. Certainly, they were not allowed to go on the top shelf. And if you did go on the top shelf, you were not allowed to get into my dad's books. But from a very early age, I was snitching his books and reading them.
Really well put. You know, we studied Joyce, and that was sort of the number. There were 4 books his dad had in the house. I can't wait to hear what that 5th title is, because Power of Positive Thinking is truly a Bible I grew up. But there were no, what do they call those Tijuana Bibles up there too? Were any of those up there?
I'm not sure what you mean by a Tijuana Bible.
They're called 8-pagers. They're like old comic book characters in pornography, little comic books, like illegal comic books that use like Popeye with in pornographic redoings. So they were called Tijuana Bibles. Frank Zappa sings about him in one of his songs. He goes, a nappy little pamphlet in my father's bottom drawer. So, boomers like us had dads who had these, like almost like pre-Playboy, like pornographic stuff. And I remember in Flint, Michigan, going behind a gas station once and finding one of these and going, "What is this?" So anyway, sorry for the divert.
No, that you're introducing me to something new. But I can tell you that my father was he had a great sense of rectitude. I'm sure my father had zero experience with pornography of any kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now back to information. Why do humans collect or gather information?
Well, they need to survive.
Yeah.
If you look at a human being from the point of view of anthropology or primatology, the most noticeable characteristic right off the bat is that they prolong infancy into adulthood. In other words, most mammals have a certain repertoire of instincts and learned reactions that they have to acquire very, very early, even before they leave the nest. And humans are just not like that. They have to continue learning. And so to continue learning, they continue the juvenile characteristics for years and years, which is why our faces and our skulls are shaped the way they are. We're shaped like an ape who never matured.
Man, that brought up so much, but let's take it one at a time. What's primatology? What is that?
The study of primates.
Study of primates. Okay.
Yeah, not only the great apes, but also monkeys.
Yeah. And then continuing learning as a child, I find in studying art, literature, poetry, music, that many artists strive to get back to the innocence of child creativity, impulses. They strive to be like unlearn and just be free. Is that similar to what you're saying we continue to learn as kids, or is that a little different?
Well, mostly what we have to learn growing up is by following examples. So that's more implicit, but mostly it's through mastering language. And I think when artists say they try to return to childhood, what they're really saying is they're hoping they can return to a state where they were immature in using language, thinking that will help with other modalities such as music or visual art.
That is so heavy. Oh my God. Okay. Is this need or want to collect information more innate in humans or more invented?
It's innate.
Wow. What's the difference between art and science?
Well, what's the common wrap on that? Science is evidence-based. In other words, science is inductive and art is deductive.
Boy, Dillon, it's sure a pleasure to talk with you. I've been fortunate to spend those trips in cars with you, and this is a real treat and an honor to be able to tape it all down. I need to say, I have so many notes that I don't know where they are from all these. So, do thoughts create emotions?
I would say it could trigger either way, but usually I would say that concrete thoughts are prompted by emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way to use language. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I wouldn't agree with that myself. I think a lot of things that I never ever ever share with anybody in any way, and I'm fully aware of what those thoughts are.
Well, that's like Frank Zappa's song, "Who Are the Brain Police?" Are the brain police some evil capitalistic consumer society, or there's something in our brain? But I mean, let me just say what McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I've said it.
Yeah.
Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Who said that?
Joan Didion.
Oh, Joan Didion.
Yeah.
No, I think either needing to give a speech, like a minister needing to give a sermon, or a politician needing to give a campaign speech, or someone who has a deadline to produce an essay or a poem, can force you to organize your thoughts for other people, for the benefit of other people. I don't think that provides your primary and original motivation for thinking those thoughts.
Right. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
Thinking is innate.
And is language more innate or more invented?
Innate.
Wow, that's it.
No, the capacity for language is innate. Your specific language is learned.
Yeah.
You know, but there were, when philosophers were first trying to figure this out in the 18th century, there were cases of, you know, they went looking for feral children. They believed that these legends that there were children raised by wolves, and they wanted to find one to see what a human being would be like without language. And in our time, the closest thing to that are children that are greatly abused and locked away and hidden away by their parents. And those cases are very rare, but they have occasionally happened. And those kids are really, really messed up. And it's hard to tell how much of that is from being deprived of society or love, and how much of it is not learning language or being able to express themselves in language.
Yeah. There's a guy who was found, never saw a movie many years ago. I don't know how many years ago. And then they found him, and the first movie they showed him was Star Wars. And I forgot the whole story, but the two movies that did tackle that subject, feral child, was The Wild One by Truffaut and Every Man for Himself and God Against All by Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
So they've dabbled in that.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I pursue happiness indirectly by pursuing meaning. And when I say that, and first of all, just the word happiness itself, our sense of that word is very recent. You know, happiness for centuries just meant what was happening. That which is happening is the current happiness. But if you move towards happenings that give you comfort or satisfaction, then you achieve happiness, which is always linked with freedom, which is what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said the pursuit of happiness. I don't think it's possible for people to be happy unless they have a measure of freedom. So what I think, like, I just turned 70, and I consider myself a very fortunate person. You know, I came from challenging beginnings, but I've had a career and I've lived a life where I was able to promote my own values. And now I live in a very beautiful place. And I'm I feel like I feel like Gregor Mendel because I just get to devote myself to my planting beds, my flowers and my trees. And I have a good family life. I have wonderful friends here in this vicinity. Great music parties. I'm able to write and publish what I want to write and publish. And I'm finally turning my attention to the thing I have procrastinated the most, which is writing my memoirs, which is so commonplace that it's trite. But my only ambition is to write my memoirs for my two sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I can read them too. And I agree with you. I spent time with your family and your gardens and your music parties, and they've been just heavenly. But I got the question from Viktor Frankl, and he said, man's search for meaning. What I got is he said, well, happiness doesn't last and meaning does. So if me and you share an ice cream cone, which I know and can visualize a time where we shared ice cream cones together on these long trips, the happiness of the taste and the stopping, and being together was great, but the ice cream cone ended. But the meaning that we had in sharing lapsed. So I know to differentiate, but was that what Frankl was saying? Was he saying that happiness may end, but meaning lasts longer?
No, I would say that the meaning of the ice cream cone is that we have an instinctive attraction to sugar. And so the individual ice cream cone may come and go, but our drive to feel sweet sensations on our tongue and have some more, that is persistent as long as we're alive. And that is also innate. We crave sugar just the way we crave salt.
Wow. But I heard that white sugar was processed by human beings. You're saying even if we didn't process white sugar, that sweetness in fruit we would still crave?
Yes, or if you're talking to me here in Maine, we gotta get around to maple syrup.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, syrup.
Yeah.
Raw sugar, honey.
Yeah.
How many people have fought a bear over honey,
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
I do not believe that the brain self-consciously creates consciousness or deliberately or intentionally creates consciousness. It is a function of the brain, an organic function of the brain.
Right. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of light.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, I'm switching over to battery-powered everything. I just got a battery-powered chainsaw, which I strongly advocate for. You see what I mean? For years, we've used hand tools that are cabled, and the revolution in energy that's going on right now is rechargeable batteries. So I've been switching over. Every time I buy a tool, it's battery powered. And I do not have an electric automobile, but I have said, I vowed and declared that my next vehicle is going to be battery powered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I didn't hear you, Gerry.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I don't worry about a damn thing.
Wow, that is beautiful. That is beautiful.
I have no trouble going to sleep at night.
McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of the things we invent, pencils, philosophy, cell phones, so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about inventions. But McLuhan's main conundrum was, well, why do we avoid the hidden psychic effects? Why do we avoid learning them when we can look to artists, filmmakers, musicians, poets to reveal them to us?
Well, antenna, you know, are receivers.
Yeah.
Antenna receive, transmitters transmit.
Yeah.
So I question his analogy somewhat in the first place, but what I do worry about and what I'm concerned about is mostly provided by investigative journalists and scientists. So let's say, how dependent are we all on our smartphones? How much do we enjoy and rely upon our smartphones? But if we pay attention to where those rare earth metals are coming from in Africa that are necessary for smartphones, and how those things are mined and by whom, we wouldn't touch our cell phone.
Yeah.
If we really understood that and internalized it. But I don't get that information from poets. Or I could learn it from a novel, I suppose, but I tend to learn it from CNN and MSNBC.
No, that's really good, because the whole purpose is to sort of, at the same time I ask all these scripted questions, I want to revise the questions and redo them so they're better. And I really should. No one's challenged me on that. I should say, when Pound said artists are the antenna of the race, he was implying they are also the transmitter. So I could just fudge it a little there. But I read this real important contemporary novelist, or I heard her talk about her mother lived in some island and she never read books. She learned about what to do when a tsunami hit from the songs. So that's sort of like an example of what you're saying to those people who aren't reading. They would learn safety, In general, I know it's both and it depends. Your observations of humans, are they more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Feeling.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yes, but I've been working on my memoirs.
Well, we'll look forward to reading that. If you don't want to tell us about it, that's all right.
No, I do want to tell you about it.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I have an older sister named Susan, who's a year and a half older than I am. So when I was three and a half, she would have been 4.5 or 5. And I have a very vivid memory of sitting on a rail fence with her. This would have been in Acton, Indiana, summertime, at our aunt and uncle's house. And we had, what do you call them? Like, what do you call those frozen treats popsicles? We had popsicles. Yeah. I had a raspberry popsicle. She had an orange popsicle. But our aunt did not give us the entire popsicle, which came with 2 sticks from the freezer. We each had a half a popsicle, a complete popsicle. And on this fence where we were sitting, there was just a profusion of flowers. blooming, including honeysuckle and trumpet vine. So I was holding my popsicle up to the trumpet vine, showing her that it was the same color as the flower, and pointing to the honeysuckle by way of telling her that that was the same color as her popsicle. And then I was holding my popsicle up to other things, comparing the color, including her hair. She had bright red hair. So we were not talking. We were just pointing our popsicles at stuff as a way of exploring colors.
Really beautiful, well put. Just an aside, Cezanne or Matisse said, if you take your painting and put it in the bushes and it blends in, it's a good painting.
Which one said that? Was it Cezanne?
I don't know. I gotta do better research, but it's also, if you put your popsicle close to the flowers and it bends in. So is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, that depends on your experience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I would say for me, my memories of other people are largely a blessing. I would say my memories of myself are largely a curse. Because I have so many regrets.
Wow. And that's immense. Do regrets sadden you or inspire you? Or what do regrets do to you? How did they shape your behavior?
Well, they sadden me greatly. I would say my regrets influenced by behavior mostly by giving me practice in compartmentalizing the past.
That's your coping mechanism?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, don't we all just say, well, there's nothing I can do about that, so let's just put it out of my mind.
I'd say that's an effective coping mechanism. Tell me one early role model within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact, briefly?
Well, my father was a great inspiration to me. And he was raised up poor. He grew up poor in Dorchester and South Boston. He did go to high school. He went to the Boston High School of Commerce, which was the high school that was meant to track kids into business careers. In other words, it wasn't the Boston Latin School, which was going to send you off to college. It was the Boston High School of Commerce. And going back to those books I found in his closet, you know, by the time I was in high school and I was being assigned to read Walden or being assigned to read Tale of Two Cities, I could bring them up with him. In other words, before that, I couldn't admit to him that I had read Walden, or else I would have been admitting that I had taken the book out of his closet. But once I had to bring it home to do homework, I could talk with him about Walden. What he clarified with me was that those books were not from his high school course in comparative literature or American literary history. They were from a Saturday morning session at the YMCA. He would go to the Y on Saturday morning. He was a great swimmer, but in addition to swimming, he would study American literature because he was not getting it in high school. So that was an insight for me. He always felt, I think he always felt insecure and somewhat inferior about his education and his intellectual background. But I loved him inside and out. I loved everything about him. You know, I loved his tone of voice, his speaking voice. I loved his handwriting. He was a good baseball player, you know, who played with us kids out in the backyard. He was great at camping. He and my brother and I would go camping and fishing together. He had been active in the Boy Scouts, and, you know, he just knew every knot. He knew how to sharpen an axe. He knew how to gut out a fish with a sheath knife, you know, all the sorts of things a kid might admire in a man. And I loved the way he smelled. You know, he sometimes on Sunday afternoons he would take a nap on the couch, and I would just get a little chair and I would sit by the couch and get as close to him as I could, just to breathe in his aroma, which was a combination of Camel unfiltered cigarettes and bay rum, you know, and glycerin that he used as aftershave lotion. So once I got through my own hippie phase where I wasn't much interested in shaving at all, I would try to recreate his homemade shaving lotion just to recreate his smell.
That is amazing. So well put. And, how long did he live to what age?
He lived to be about 80. He died in 92, I think.
And do you think longevity is more DNA or more lifestyle choice?
DNA.
Yeah. Wow.
He never stopped smoking. He smoked 2 packs of Camels a day.
But that's pre-pesticides on the tobacco?
I suppose. But he did not die of lung problems.
Yeah.
Inexplicably.
Outside the immediate, go ahead.
Outside the immediate family?
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, he had been active in Boy Scouts, and my brother and I were active in Boy Scouts in our small town in Indiana. And round the corner from us, there was a family named Haley, and the mother, the mother maiden name was Hawley, and she had been born in England. So it was almost as if a Briton named Hawley had married an American named Haley. But anyway, her father came to live with them from England, and he was a retired railroading engineer. But so Thomas Hawley was my mentor growing up. And I was very fortunate to know him. I used to, there was a wild cherry tree in our side yard, and I used to climb up there mostly to watch for my dad come walking home from the firehouse where he worked, but also to watch these mourning doves that were nesting up there. I would climb up so quietly and carefully that I did not disturb the birds, and they would come and go on the nest. And once I met him, I realized that he was an amateur naturalist. And although he had worked on the railroads, he had aquariums at home where he kept African frogs, and he knew every bird and every plant and every tree, even though that area was new territory to him. You know, he was from England. But once I met him through the Scouts, he and I were inseparable.
Wow.
And Gerry, he was a landscape painter. Wow. He painted as a hobby. So that probably the first person I ever knew who could sit down and paint a picture on a canvas. And when he died, I got 2 things from his daughter. his beret. I got a green beret from him, which was from the English Boy Scouts, not the American Army unit. And I got his backpack, which had a British flag sewn onto it. But anyway, I still have those things.
Beautiful. What a beautiful recollection, Dillon. Thank you for sharing us that. If God does exist, what do you want God to say to you after you die?
That you acquitted yourself.
What's that verb mean?
Well, when someone undertakes something challenging or difficult and they come through, they may not be the best or they may not win the game, but they make a good effort and they finish the task, then you could say that he acquitted himself.
Beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I don't believe evil is an impersonal force. I think there are people that are I do believe there are sociopaths who have evil effects on other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This question involves some modern thinkers' thoughts. The question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But I'll just read a couple of them. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think it depends upon if they're trying to be your enemy or if that's just a side effect of your interaction. And when I say that, I mean that I think that most conflict among people comes from competition. So if someone feels in competition with you, they will treat you as an adversary. And they might fight fair or they might fight unfair, but it's because they're trying to, in some sense, win. And they believe that they cannot win unless they get the better of you. So in my career, well, first of all, let's just go back to my touchstone, which is my father. When I was late teen, early 20s, trying to decide what to do, and I went to college and signed up for American Studies. And although I tried biology, I very soon drifted towards folklore and ethnomusicology, which just mystified him. He said, how are you going to earn a living? I would say, I am going to earn a living playing the banjo. And he said, you will never amount to anything. But I did earn a living playing the banjo, and that led into other kinds of work in the arts and humanities. And I think that when I was coming up, let's say when I was a college dropout playing music for a living was 1976, 75, 76, 77, and the bicentennial was happening. And because of the bicentennial, every public library, historical society, small town museum, small town arts council wanted programs on American history. And out there, there's a little bit of history about the American Revolution, but not a lot. But there's a lot of what people were looking for, which was pioneer history, stories of the early settlement, and the coming of being of that society out there, whether it was Ohio or Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky. I had more work than I could handle, doing school curricula, museum exhibitions, library, gallery talks, you name it. I was very, very busy. And that led me back to the university because I had no credentials whatsoever. But in those days, it didn't matter as much. It hasn't clamped down like it is now. I kept feeling I could drop out as often as I wanted to and go back to work. It's not like I had to finish college to go to work. College was in the way of working. And also my particular line of work, which was being a sidekick to elderly musicians, there was a sense of urgency because the people I was trying to serve, like Lotus Dickey or Hector Phillips, were not long for this world. I could say, well, let me finish my degree and then let me go to graduate school and let me do a fellowship and then I'll get ready to start cranking out work. But they would have been deceased by then. So I just followed my nose, and I went to school like 1 or 2 courses at a time, and beyond that, I was doing my own personal work, and truly, truly enjoying it.
Really well put, because you anticipated some upcoming questions and covered that. But let's go back to one word that you brought up. The word is competition. It's sort of a basic question. Is competition more innate or more invented by humans? But let me just set it up with another quote. Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who a hero is and who is not a hero.
Well, when I think of a hero, I think of that original sense of a battlefield hero. In the Iliad, you know who won. You know if Achilles or Hector won. And Achilles was the hero because he was dragging Hector around on the ground from his chariot, In that sense, you do know whether you win or not. You win if you survive. But I agree that in most areas of life, it's quite ambiguous. And, if you can, my yardstick has always been, if you can do what you need to do and have what you want to have without going into debt, you're winning. If you can only have what you need by going into debt, you're losing.
Good words, wise words. But just in general, is competition more innate or more invented?
Innate.
Yeah.
We're primates, and primates are hierarchical mammals. Right? So when you ask me about the enemy, the people that I've construed as enemies in my life, I've later realized are envious of me. And I don't feel like I'm someone who is heroic in any way as to be brought down. But as I say, from a very early age, I was doing those things that I wanted to do. I was making ethnographic films. I was writing books for the university press. I was producing traveling exhibitions for the State Arts Museum, on and on and on, as an undergraduate. Why did that happen? Well, it was the time and the place and the fact that I was willing to do it. I wasn't trying to beat out anybody, but you can engender feelings of resentment and envy. And now that I've reached this age, there's a very strong pattern in my life of people that you would consider frenemies, your colleagues that have always felt competitive towards you, who are dying. And I'm going for deathbed conversations where they essentially apologize for competing with me, sometimes competing unfairly, sometimes competing for bad motives, just because it seemed like everything came so easily to me. And they hated it.
Yeah. The American Indians or indigenous people say your enemy's your best teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
What tribe
So-
is that?
Say it again.
What tribe is that, Gerry? When people say Native Americans say,
I know. I'll tell you, I had trouble. I'm glad you're helping me. Shenandoah, what Dalai Lama quoted Shenandoah saying that.
I see.
So what tribe would that be?
Well, Shenandoah, if you're speaking of, I'm not sure who you're speaking of, but there was an early sachem from the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia that might be referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of bunkum, Gerry. There's a whole lot of bunkum in circulation about Native Americans.
Yeah.
And as a group, what they feel and what they think and what they say.
Bokum is a great word, but let's do this one really quick. I've heard, let's just say, this is the best way to say indigenous or Native Americans. What do you prefer? What should I say?
Either is fine.
Okay, Native Americans have no nouns; they only have verbs.
Bunkum.
Bokum. Dang.
You know,
Okay.
let's just say in the eastern United States, there are two big language families. There's the Algonquin and the Iroquois.
Okay.
Iroquois got here later, after the Algonquins got here. And I think what you're referring to is this sense of their grammar. It does involve accumulating, what we would call in English syllables, into quite long strings, and they can be made up of verb forms. But just like we might have a gerund, you know, like here's a sled, and we go sledding on a sled. So sledding becomes a verb. Doesn't mean we don't have the noun sled. See what I mean?
Yes, that was good. James Joyce was the first projectionist allegedly 100 years ago in Dublin. He checked out. He basically said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, in his case, somebody might pay him to run a projector. Nobody's going to pay him to go outside and look at a tree. Right? Being a projectionist in a movie theater is a job, but it's in the service of having gatherings of people, either performers or audience, for that shared experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the shared experience.
Yeah. Shared experience. Very well put in 2 words. I love that. Okay, so a screenwriter. No, what was the? You sort of talked about, going into the banjo, but tell us, growing up, what devices were you mainly listening to music on, live or radio or vinyl? And then at what point did you go, "Oh, I can do that"? And then you says, "I'm going to start playing an instrument"?
Well, in central Indiana, where I grew up, a lot of the public school systems were influenced by German immigrants from the 19th century. So all kinds of organized music were very prevalent. There were symphony orchestras, There were mass choirs. Every church had a good choir. Every school system had a very good music program. And I largely attribute that to immigrants from Germany. So I grew up playing the cello from a very early age. And I learned to read music, and I learned about the history of fine art music, classical music, as a boy. And, you know, I was in an orchestra through the public school. Speaking of competition, where you had to audition for your chair. Let's say maybe there were 12 cellos in the cello section, and which one are you going to be? You know, you had to go into the conductor and play in a closed room. And I will never forget, first time I did that, which was probably in the 5th grade. I came in, sat down. He said, "Good morning." I said, "Good morning." He said, "That's all you say. When you audition, you do not say, excuse me, I have a cold," or "Excuse me, my eggs and sausage this morning aren't agreeing with me," or "Excuse me, this is a very itchy sweater." You hush your mouth and play. Say, "Good morning," sit down and play. And that was valuable for me, you know. Obviously, I've never forgotten it. Don't make excuses.
Yeah.
To show what you can do. So I grew up in an orchestra. I grew up in choirs at school and at church. I can remember, again, 5th or 6th grade, before my voice had changed, singing with the elderly ladies in the soprano section, because I was singing the soprano part. But everything changed with the war in Vietnam. You know, this huge rupture with my father over the war. And coming out of that, right when I was graduating high school, I had saved some money from my after-school job, and I had to make a choice between going to college and buying a cello. I had always rented a cello from the school system. And I decided to go to college. And that was the year that I stopped. I actually, when I got to Bloomington to go to college, I did play chamber music for a while with borrowed instruments. I had no idea how fortunate I was, but a lot of my friends were in the music school. So I was meeting professors like Joseph Gingold or Janos Starker. I'm going over to their houses in the evenings to play chamber music. But nevertheless, I took up the banjo, and it was part of counterculture. You know, it was part of protesting the war in Vietnam.
But who'd you hear? Someone live or on the record? Or who was the banjo kind of guy, person that focused you, or a couple people or group? Or
John Hartford.
Right. Good.
Yeah. Because, and also, you know, I was very interested in the rivers, and I was interested in the river boats, and he was also into river boats. So I would say he was, early on, he was my main inspiration. And yet I realized that my interests were even more primitive than his were, in the sense that he was into the big paddle wheel steamboats, whereas I wanted to go back farther to the keel boats and the flatboats. And he played a bluegrass style banjo with a resonator, but I realized that I had to go beyond John Hartford to the old timey banjo. But he was my gateway.
Great word, gateway. I need that word. So, Dillon, what was your gateway to lyric writing?
Anne Sexton.
Wow. She's a poet, though.
Yeah. But so when I was 16, my dad moved the family from Indiana to Massachusetts. And the first year we were there, which was 66, 67, I went to Wayland High School. Wayland is a suburb of Boston. And out there, people speak of the W towns, which are Weston, Wayland, Wellesley, And then on the other side of the beltway around the city is Waltham. But those are the W towns. And we were in Wayland. And Anne Sexton that year was a visiting artist. She wasn't a regular faculty teacher. She was visiting artist. And she was only available to certain selected seniors. And I was a junior. But there was a, as I think about it now, there was a Coke machine out in the hallway beyond the classroom where she taught. And on the pretext of going to the Coke machine, I would stand by the door of that classroom to listen. And she was a mess. You know, she smoked heavily. She would not stop smoking for the school. She said she didn't have to because she was a visiting artist. And also she had a bad caffeine habit. So she would come out into the hall to buy a Coke, and she would see me there a few times. And finally she just invited me in. And I said, you know, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in study hall. She said, I'll get you in if you care that much. And that was the year she published a collection, I think it was called Transformations. It was rewriting European folk tales. And she had a poem. I'm not sure it was in that collection or the next one, but the refrain on that poem was, "At night alone I marry the bed." It was a poem about masturbation. And I didn't even know you could talk about masturbation, let alone write about it. But "At night alone I marry the bed" was a lesson in how to be implicit, you know, how to be elusive, how to use language to say something indirectly. Obviously, she didn't literally marry the bed. So what the heck was she talking about? So it was just opening up. It was opening up and realize that through lyrics, through poetry, through songwriting, you could deal with things that were important to you that were not ordinarily the topics of polite conversation.
Yeah, I'm dying to know if you ever read Finnegan's Wake, because there's a point in Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce where the four bedposts talk. They're John, Luke, you know, the four guys. It's pretty amazing. So, because Sylvia Plath was reading the Wake. Was Anne Sexton a peer of Plath? Were they same age basically or different?
Yes.
Yeah, could have been. So then that's a poet. Before we go into poetry for a second, one other gateway lyricist who wasn't just a poet, like a song lyricist.
Oh, Tim Burton, you know, you'd have to say Bob Dylan. I mean, Bob Dylan was just everywhere in those days. It was pervasive. I remember when he had his motorcycle accident, I think I was in the 9th grade. But so here are these adolescent kids in Indiana who were gravely concerned because Bob Dylan had a motorcycle accident, you know. But his early acoustic albums were very important, and James Taylor. Yeah. But when I started going to the Vineyard, you know, I started meeting the Taylors. I started meeting Kate Taylor and Livingston Taylor and Hugh Taylor, and eventually I met James Taylor. They had a house in Weston, which is where we moved. Then following year, we moved from Wayland to Weston, and the Taylors were associated with Weston. So I think they had moved on, but the prior year they had been living there when the kids were all leaving home. So I actually met them in Weston before I knew them on the Vineyard. But, you know, fire and rain.
Yeah.
what was a kind of song that anybody and everybody I knew at the time who was interested in music was talking about.
Yep. Well put. Thanks, Dillon. And so, what's the function of poetry?
The function of poetry. Does it have a function? I mean, I don't see it as being an instrument that has instrumentality in the world. You know, it's an expression. It's a form of expression that draws upon certain properties of language. And if it, you know, historically, poetry would draw heavily on metaphor, and metaphor is very, very important. Like, at night alone I marry the bed is a metaphor. I'm not sure that contemporary poetry is as metaphorical.
No, that was great. The whole point of this series is to invent new questions. So you win. You answered the question with the question. Thank you. Congratulations. Okay, so but Leo Bersani's Mallarmé study said the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. Any comment on that line?
Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
So would that crisis be a personal crisis like Sylvia Plath, or a social crisis like a political scandal, or does it matter?
Yeah, that's what I'm always intrigued by, because I think it's wide open. If you're sitting down and going, I'm going to write a poem, that's the crisis. Like, well, what am I going to write about? You know, that to me is
if you have to ask what you're going to write about, you're not in a crisis.
Well, how about Gary Snyder's? My task as a poet entails the work. Excuse me. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then bringing that seeing into language.
That sounds to me like what they call imagistic poetry, which is a trend. It was a movement in modernism. So I can relate to what he's talking about. But I would say for the great majority of poets and the great majority of the past, poetry has been entirely about language.
Yes. Wow.
That's for him to say he's having experiences without language that he's then trying to express is a countercultural thing that's fairly recent.
Yeah. Is imagistic a movement like symbolism? Because I've studied symbolism literature and I know the painting symbolism movement, but is imagistic a movement back then, or when is, do you know that?
Yeah, I think it had its biggest moment in the 1920s, 1930s.
Right.
Yeah. And it was avant-garde. It was strikingly avant-garde.
Yeah. A screenwriting teacher told me that great art, great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says great film or great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
It to me, it is essential. Yeah. And I don't try to be obscure. I think that what I do is pretty much an open book, you know. And as I say, this writing I'm trying to do now has a very specific intention, which is to try to justify myself to my two sons. That's my intention.
Yeah. So you sort of nailed it there, but this is like, think of like you're writing songs, your albums with Bob Lucas, or when you're writing songs that are Dylan written lyrics. How much did Duchamp said there's no art without an audience? How much are you thinking of your audience while you're creating?
It's pretty effortless. I would say that my rule of thumb is you've done something substantial if somebody wants to parody it or satirize it. And that actually happened with my very first song that I ever did, which was in high school. And I wanted to write a love song that would be in the mode of Waylon Jennings or Merle Haggard or somebody like that, a country western, hard living, hard drinking, hard smoking country western singer, which I was not. I mean, I had a classical guitar at that time, actually. So I'm trying to write a honky tonk song on a classical nylon string guitar. But the lyrics went something like red rose, yellow rose, pure white rose, you see. But I never sent any rose could make my love love me. And then the chorus had sort of a gambling riff. I think maybe Kenny Rogers, the gambler, was say, I played her game to win. I bet my heart, and I suppose that I'm no good at gambling because all I held was a rose. So I sang this for my friends, and I was very, very proud of it. And then I heard them singing, red light, yellow light, bright green light, you see. I never saw any light could make me put on the brakes. You know, they were just making fun of me, which at that age I took to mean that I had touched them, you know. That's my rule of thumb. If somebody's making fun of you, then that's probably a form of a compliment.
It's really well put. I think Frank Zappa and Preston Sturges both were alchemists, and they take two known things and put them together and create a third unknown thing. In, like, you know, theatrical rock for Zappa or screwball comedies for Preston Sturges. But with their third new thing, they satirize that themselves. They don't just say, I've got a new thing here. They make fun of their own new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if everything we invent extends some humanness, like skin is clothing extends skin, knife and fork extends our teeth, eyelids are extended with the shutter of a camera, you know, whatever, even non-tangible things, philosophy extends something. What would you say the writing utensil extends for you, whether it's a pencil or a keyboard? What humanness is extended?
Time. All writing is trying to extend time.
That
even
is
if it's okay. a grocery list.
Yeah. What does the banjo extend?
I'm not sure. Does it extend anything?
Yeah.
You know, the banjo is an instrument that arose in the United States as a manufactured, marketed instrument at a certain time and place. It was so specific to that time and place that I think people have been predicting the demise of the banjo for generations. You know, and it's an instrument that will not die.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say back when you were saying your dad saying you can't make a living being a banjo player, and it's like, what about Bella Fleck? You know, he's done a pretty good job at it.
Well, I think, you know, at that time, who were the only banjo players my dad would have seen would have been on Hee Haw on television, you know. And even John Hartford wasn't on Hee Haw yet. It was Roy Clark.
Right.
Okay, so in Nashville, there can be one Roy Clark.
Yeah.
And you are not Roy Clark, you know. What are you going to do? You know, it just seemed like a very, very small market.
Yeah. Dillon, what was the motive of the cave artist?
We don't know.
What's your hunch or guess?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but what I understand is the places where they were painting were very difficult to get to. They were challenging, and they would have had to use torches. You know, it's not like they were painting right inside the mouth of the cave. And so the speculation is that it had a magical intention, which was related to successful hunting. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah. In general, I know it depends. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, again, I would say in what arena?
Yeah. You put it into the context you want.
If you're trying to get along around the house with your wife, compromise is much more important. If you're trying to pass legislation in Congress, probably conviction is more important.
You know, my favorite answer to that question after 30 years was, depends on what you mean by important.
Yes.
So that was sort of what you did. But actually, the second baby was like, Roy Zimmerman's kids were like 8 and 9 years old. I asked them, and they said, those words are too big for us.
Well, Gerry, I know your wife, and you know my wife. And so I think that we can understand if we say that compromise is important.
Oh, yeah. And like my dad used to say, I'm on probation, you know, to like make it sound. And my mom would yell, don't say that line anymore. You've accomplished, in your accomplishments, Dillon, how would you rate these elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck.
Is the top, then what's second and third?
Well, I have no ambition at all, so I'd have to say skill. But I don't think of myself as particularly skilled at what I do.
Yeah.
So for me and my interests, I was at the right place and the right time to get started. And then once you're started, you launch yourself, you know.
Well, how would you respond to Gary Player, the golfer? He said, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
I could nod at that. Yep.
Yeah. T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, vis-a-vis poetry, it's in English.
Okay, what form is your inner consciousness in?
Impulses. Wow. You know, William James had this great essay, the 19th century psychologist at Harvard. And I forget the exact case, you know. Let's say you're sitting in a chair and you're thirsty. When do you stand up to go get a glass of water? You know, what is that instant where you move? You decide to go from sitting to standing. It's actually completely inexplicable when and why and how that happens. But it has something to do with being thirsty.
Yeah.
And the other, I draw on William James a lot, and particularly his analysis of language. And, you know, he was very good at pointing out that so much depends on how we define terms.
Yeah.
You know, he told this story about, which he said was from his own life, of a hunter who was out in the woods, and he was hunting squirrels. And he saw a squirrel on a tree trunk, and he started circling the tree to try to get a clear shot at it. And every time he moved, the squirrel moved to stay on the opposite side of the tree, all the way around, you know. And the question was, did the hunter walk around the squirrel or not?
Yeah.
And it all depends on how you define walking around.
Yeah. Well, it's the perfect lead into this question. You must have ESP. Is perception reality?
No. Perception is mediated by our senses, and so therefore it is an image of reality that our bodies allow. But it's not the ultimate reality.
Moshe, thank you. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness that you've incorporated to become a strength.
Well, I don't know, Gerry. You know, I would say I've never had training as a singer, you know, and I've been told that I do not have a good singing voice. But since my aspiration was to sing like Waylon Jennings or Merle Haggard, the fact that it's a little rough would probably be turned to my advantage.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a great example. Did you see that documentary on Merle Haggard? I loved it because he hires all these people to be in his band. He's got this huge, you know, he did really good in his life. And all he did his whole career was sing about losing his dad. And his wife is gorgeous. And she's going, why are you still singing about that? That's all he's obsessed with it, you know? And I mean, basically, would you say that was like his therapy? Was his singing was the way to deal with his, yeah.
Oh, quite so. You know, I've seen that over and over again in my musical projects. You know, I'll give you an example. You know, I've done a lot of work recreating and interpreting the life of this 19th century shipping captain named Joshua Slocum.
Yeah.
And I was over at a friend's house one day who is a psychotherapist, and it wasn't a therapy session. I was just visiting him, but on his desk, on his coffee table, actually, was a new book about attention deficit disorder. And attention, what did it call hyperactive attention deficit disorder in adults. And I picked it up and I just started leafing through it casually, and I recognized myself. And I jumped up, shouting, saying, it's a syndrome. There's a word for it. You know, there's a label that I could put on myself. And I saw that same pattern in Joshua Slocum. You know, I'm sure that if he went to a therapist in the 20th century, he would have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity. So as I'm trying to use this insight to help myself by writing about Slocum, writing songs from his mouth, you know, from his point of view, that was actually how I was treating myself for ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really well put. Thank you. I also don't want to go there, but it's like create the disease and offer the cure. It's like codependency. Oh, you're codependent. Well, they created a new term in psychology to say something. Everyone's codependent, but no, we have a gauge. We have a gauge. You're too codependent. So I know I believe in psychology and psychiatry to an extent, and I also think it's a bit of a scam, but I'm glad that you read that book, because I'm totally that all the way. I'm there. But we've talked about this in the past. What's the function of music? Why did humans invent music?
Yes.
Okay, what's the function of music?
To make music.
That is great. But Dillon, I don't mean to laugh at, I'm just saying you taught me that Mickey Hart was sort of accurate in his book, that music started as a communication. They're coming to take our food, a warning system. You know, they would hit the log as a communication.
Well, there is some ethnographic work that, well, first of all, let me say there's this common notion of talking drums in Africa, but there's no such thing as talking drums. But there are drumming patterns that can send signals. But signals are distinct from grammatical language. So yes, I think that music can be used to signal, and in Scandinavia, you know, horns were used to signal. Yeah.
But you also go ahead. Sorry.
Well, that might have been a factor in both cases in the evolution of music, but you know, as primates, we evolved with music long before Homo sapiens. I mean, we were co-evolving with music, but I believe that music is its own excuse for being.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve a larger purpose very reliably. But obviously drums can be used on the battlefield to signal. Trumpets can be used on the battlefield to signal. Poets, lyrical, you know, to say somebody's a lyrical poet, that goes back to ancient Greece when the bards would hold lyres, Lyres, on their laps and play as they sang. It was the beginning of the singer-songwriter in a coffee house with an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
You know, it's just been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And not only does it not change much in society or politics, but it's ordinarily not remembered. Every generation reinvents it. Yeah. I mean, we know something about ancient Greek musical theory, and we know something about the instruments, but we have no idea what it sounded like in performance. It just, it evaporates. Unless you have recording devices, it evaporates. And recordings deteriorate over time. So I've come to feel comfortable thinking about music as just ephemeral. It's essentially ephemeral, and it's going to help you in your moment with your crowd, whatever that is. But it has no lasting effects.
Yeah. I think Walter Pater said it best. All art aspires to the condition of music. Literature, painting, everything wishes it could be as cool as music is. but you also taught me, Dillon, that the function of music was dance.
Well, I think originally they were inseparable. There is a theory along those lines, which goes back to the Victorian anthropologists, that it was all one at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I asked for 90 minutes. Can you go another 10 or 15, or how do you feel?
I feel fine.
Okay. So we're gonna bring Clinton on in a few, but I got another page on this script we got to get to. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Well, when you don't lose your composure.
Yeah. What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
I think it's a spectrum. If so, are you asking me psychologically what's the biggest difference?
Well, again, you put it in the context you want. I can tell you how most people have answered that, and if you want, and then you can respond to that, my two things, or you can put it in the context you want.
Well, I think there are times and places when women are under pressure to feel and think and act in a masculine manner. And there are similar situations where men are under pressure to feel and think and act in a feminine manner. And so you can see them as nodes on a type graph, but honestly, I don't think you can generalize about men and women.
Yeah.
Especially when there's money involved, when there's either payment or a career, or look at the women who have been heads of state, like Margaret Thatcher or Golda Meir. They say, oh well, yeah, they were very masculine women. They were women acting like a man, or women being a man, but they were women who could do what they felt was needed to be done to be the head of state.
Yeah, because here's what most people say is women are emotional and men aren't, and men are linear. So then I love when people go, and 20% of people do. There is no difference. It's not that there's no difference. It's that, we're human beings. So I love the commonality in that. But when I've said this, I've heard this theory that the word mafia. No, first of all, summarize when I asked you what caused matriarchy. So we have it on tape. You did about 3 or 4 sentences that were beautiful. And do you recall what caused matriarchy? How would you answer that?
There's no such thing as matriarchy. In an ethnographic sense, there is the idea of matriarchy. And speaking of Victorian anthropologists, there was a theory in Victorian England, as well as Germany and France and so on, that there was an early phase of human evolution which was matriarchal, and in which women ruled. Some people define and redefine matriarchy, but my understanding of it is that it means a government of a city-state or a complex society in which women rule, women wield political power.
Yeah.
That's an abstraction which is necessary for certain theories of society. There is no evidence that it has ever, ever, ever existed.
No, really well put, because what I should do is rephrase the question and say, what caused the idea of matriarchy? That would probably be a better way to word the question, wouldn't you think?
Maybe, yeah. I think it arose originally because these theorists looking around could see all these problems with society, all the ways that human society had gone wrong under men.
Yeah.
But we can imagine a better way of being. Therefore, there must have been a time when women ruled.
So this leads to the word mafia. Again, this is a sort of comical theory, but I think it resonates a little. The word mafia begins with the word ma, because women run the world, but they let men think they run the world. That they let men think that men run the world. So I said that at this reading group, and this elderly woman said, "Hey, don't reveal our secret." I thought that was a great response, because most people go, "That's not true." How do you find peace of mind?
I I'd say I find peace of mind by becoming elderly
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
not striving in the same way. When you're mid-career and you need to support a household and you have massive bills and undertakings and you need to maintain your place and you need your next promotion, there's a feeling that you're striving. But the whole concept of retirement, is stepping back. And I feel that right now I'm getting used to being retired. I'm trying to be accustomed to a situation where I'm not continually stressed out. And I feel like I will take on other challenging tasks and I will get more involved in, let's say, volunteer work, but not until I feel like I've completely relaxed.
Well put. I can relate. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Well, that's a very provocative thing to say. If I can digress into an anecdote for a moment.
Please.
When you're 12, you're just graduating 6th grade, right? So in Indiana, where I grew up, you're getting ready to go to junior high the next year, or you're getting ready to go to middle school, people would say now. So when I was a boy, I was known for being unusually intelligent. And part of that just was I could psych out a test very, very well. I tested well. So by the time school was over, 6th grade, we were packing up to go to Florida on vacation. So this is 6 kids and my parents. Not my birth mother. My birth mother had died when I was 4 and my father remarried when I was 5. So his second wife. And she came into the family with 2 daughters and my dad had 3 kids. And so all the report cards came home. They got thrown into a suitcase, not even to be opened until we got to Florida, where we were staying with my father's mother. So the one night at dinner, the report cards were open. I had gotten straight A pluses. No A's, no A minuses. I had gotten A pluses every grading term, every subject all year long. And my stepmother had a huge temper tantrum, just lashing out at me, saying, why do you have to do so well at everything? Why do you have to be so smart? You're making your brothers and sisters feel bad. Why can't you just be more average? Like be more mediocre. There was no approval whatsoever, whatsoever. None. There's this vicious tongue lashing. What is wrong with you? You are going to think that you're better than us. So I actually left my grandmother's apartment and I went out. You have to imagine Tarpon Springs, Florida, by the lagoon, palm trees, full moon, very different setting than what I was used to in Indiana. And I sat down on the wall of the lagoon and I was just sobbing, crying out loud, And my grandmother came down and sat down next to me and put her arm around me and said, they're really very proud of you. They just don't know what to say. And I didn't say anything, but what I thought to myself was, well, maybe my dad is a little bit proud of me. She is not proud of me. To her, I'm a big problem. So if you ask me, 12 years old, That was the spring I turned 12. That's probably my most striking memory of that time.
Yeah.
Making my brothers and sisters feel bad.
But just to suss it out, did your dad ever say, "I'm proud of you. I have to just let her be"? Did he comment on her, or did he have to just go along with what she said?
He had to go along with what she said.
Yeah.
Even, let's say, I alluded earlier to when in school I was assigned to read Walden, and I wanted to talk to him about Walden. And I tried, I tried. I said, "What did you enjoy the book? Because I know you read it because it's in your closet. It's hidden in your closet." And he said, "Oh, Thoreau." He was just like every other Yankee pack peddler. He might sell you a can opener, but it breaks as soon as he goes on over the hill. In other words, his thoughts are no good. But when I was a senior in high school, when I was a freshman in college, I dropped out. I came back home. I couldn't be at the house, so I went to live in the town forest. And it was February when I moved there. But I built a shelter, and I had to be careful not to burn fires during the day because the fire service helicopters would see them. I had to hide my little house from the air. But I had a fireplace and I had a little bed, and this was within walking distance of Walden Pond. When I was getting ready to go back to college in the fall, my dad said to me that he wanted to see my place. He wanted me to take him into the woods and show him where I had been living. And so I did. And he looked around and he said, "I envy you."
Wow.
That's the closest we got to him saying, "Maybe you've got something going on."
Wow.
And actually, now you've got me. Years and years later, when they were retiring and moving from Massachusetts to Maine, and I was helping them pack up to leave, we were sitting on the steps of they had a big house on the ocean in Plymouth, and he had made a career as a self-taught telecommunications engineer. And he said, "For years and years now, I have been telling you that I am a success and you are a failure. But I want you to know that for a long time, I've realized that you are the success and I am the failure."
How did that make you feel?
I said, "Dad, it is not a competition." It's not a competition.
Really well put, Dillon. You're my hero. So here's 5 quick Alan Watts questions, just in 3 to 5 words. Who started it all?
God.
Are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where do we put it?
We won't be here to put it anywhere.
Who's cleaning it up?
Nobody.
Is it serious?
No.
Wow. Okay, I got a few more. This has really been fun. I appreciate it. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I can honestly say that is a question I have never contemplated.
But just off the top of your head, where and what would it be made of?
Well, obviously I would want it to be carved of granite.
And where?
Right here at the Granite Quarry in Rockland would be fine.
Perfect. Dillon, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I've never had and I never want. I've never owned an airplane.
It's good. You never had it, you never want it. Great. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Duck.
Joseph Boys said, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder in 28. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table beautifully for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Well, just to speak to that quote by a writer, I would say that that's an early 20th century position. You know, confessional poetry is a movement, and Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton are both exemplars of that movement. But it was a like all things, artists being under extreme duress to constantly create something new and different. Confessional poetry for a while was new and different, you know, and that moment has somewhat passed. But during its time of confessional poetry, the ideal was to spill your guts, you know, to let it all out and let everybody in. And I suppose, you know, people like Sylvia Plath were still hiding. It's possible Anne Sexton was still hiding, but that was not their intent, you know.
Right. But don't you think that an artist of any genre, music, film, poetry, song, can't get everything out? You know, it's like this self-expression thing, but there is something that they're holding back. That's the secret. Whatever time. No,
I don't agree with that. I think there are plenty of poets and are, you know, given their time and place, if that was the objective at the time, they were, look, you know, what were we talking about the other day? Artists who strip down naked and rub chocolate pudding all over themselves and roll around on a canvas, you know, in public. They've got nothing to hide. The whole point is they've got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it more interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a very guarded, very reserved person. You know, if I'm going to work on myself, I'm going to do it indirectly through Joshua Slocum. I've never charged people a ticket at admission price, sit down and say, let me tell you about myself. Like Spalding Gray or some.
I was just going to say like Spalding Gray. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm going to say, let me tell you about Joshua Slocum.
Right.
Or let me tell you about Henry David Thoreau or any of the other historical people I've interpreted.
Right, because we did talk about this, the moral obligation. If the artist, the creator, has failings and they're getting it out through their art, do they want to be honest about their failings? So do they have a moral obligation to sugarcoat it?
No, they don't have a moral obligation to fully reveal it or hide it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just their show. What's your act? You know, let's okay, I've bought my ticket. Let's see your act. You know, there's a wide range of approaches to this.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like, was Poe doing that? Have you studied Edgar Allan Poe?
Yes, as much as anybody else in that period.
Because tell me what you think of his, it's called Effects Precede Causes, or by inventing the detective novel, he was eventually influencing the symbolists. And I'm going for the effect it's going to have on you. It's not so much the content of what I'm doing. It's I want to have an effect on you. So the effect is before the cause.
Yeah, I think part of it is they're trying to find their market. Edgar Allan Poe was not neurotic. He was an excellent creative writer who had a certain intention. And so writing about madness, quoth the raven nevermore, did not mean he was crazy. The example that you would know a lot about, people make this comparison between Werner Herzog and Les Blank.
Yeah.
Les Blank made a short documentary film called Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe.
Yeah.
And Werner Herzog will give you the impression that he's deranged. He is not deranged. You can't be deranged and make the films that he's made. Les Blank, who wants to give you the impression that he's a steady Joe, objective documentarian, has serious mental issues.
Wow. And what's your source on that?
I am acquainted with Les Blank, like many other documentary filmmakers.
Wow. I've seen lots of his films, and I really that went by me, but very interesting. Thank you. It's an intense. Does Errol Morris have serious mental issues?
I'm sorry, you got garbled there, Gerry.
Yeah. Does Errol Morris have serious mental issues?
I'm not an authority on Errol Morris.
Because he made that film on Rumsfeld, and Rumsfeld just died, and then he made his most famous film is Fog of War with McNamara.
Right. Yeah. No, just to Herzog. When I saw Aguirre, The Wrath of God,
yeah,
I came stumbling out of the movie theater, just stunned, But at the same time, it's a film about someone who goes mad, but the person who made that movie is not mad.
Yeah.
Couldn't be.
Yeah.
Couldn't be.
No, Herzog's made like 60 films. You're actually right. I've had dinner with Herzog. I've had a few encounters with him, but being a Bavarian, he comes off as rude sometimes, but I think it's how his culture is. It's like my friend who's from New York. He says, "I'm not an asshole. I'm from New York."
Well, I'm not a gentleman. I'm from Boston.
No, you know what? Like the great I think the greatest documentarian of all times, Frederick Wiseman.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do this 90-minute scripted interview with him, and I got him in the hallway about 3 or 4 years ago at USC. He's very evasive and very down to earth. And I said, how did you get this suspended judgment approach to filmmaking? He knows it's reality fiction. He does not say it's like the most balanced observational cinema there is, but basically no voiceover, no added lighting, no music, no nothing. It's just him. He said, "I'm Puritan, I'm Jewish, and I'm from New England." And that's how he answered. I goes, "I don't have to do my interview with you." He's so evasive. Anyways, these documentarian teachers are up there trying to get him to say something. He goes, "Nah, why do you make films?" He goes, no. Who inspired you to make films? He goes, "William James." How do you know if it's a good film? He goes, "Charlie Chaplin." He's really basic. Anyways, that was good. Okay, before we bring Clinton on, I got one more, and then I'll ask you two after Clinton. On what occasion do you lie?
Are we talking about little white lies, little polite fibs, or big whoppers?
I love people who put these in context. Again, you can put it into your the context you want. Which one do you want to approach? Or you can approach both.
Well, I earnestly strive to avoid big whoppers, but sociolinguists have studied this, and they are convinced that everybody fibs here and there, almost every day, for the purpose of social politeness.
Yeah.
Conflict avoidance.
Conflict avoidance. Wow. Okay, Clinton, come on. This guy's amazing. He actually sits there and listens to these. He's heard. How many have you heard, Clinton? Like 30 or 40. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, we're on number 32.
32.
Yes.
So
hearing progress here. Very interesting conversation, and the theme of being rather reserved, and then writing poetry implicitly as something you got from Ms. Sexton, leading to suggesting this idea of telling truths that you want to say through discussions of third parties or things that you've studied. That's a larger creative act to sort of remake the biography of someone else, or tell a story, an historical act, which has fidelity to the original, but which also you're bringing in truths which you can sort of slip in your own observations or put your own self in it. That's a much more creative act, I think, artistically, than, as you were saying, these bare it all kids playing around in pudding, as you put it. But I know what you're saying is not holding anything back. It reminds me of something about the function of the artist. Does the artist speak for culture at large? Like, if we find a Greek statue, do we or some pottery, in some archaeologist in Minoa or something, and they say, oh, this is a representative of this period of Greek history. Or was it one person with a chisel and representative of their 8 months of hammering away at a block of stone? So how does art function on behalf of the creator, and how does art function on behalf of the society of which they're a part? How does the artist's art specifically function on behalf of the society as a whole?
Well, I just recently read a biography of Leonardo da Vinci, and it reminded me as an example of so many other artists. A lot of their motive is earning a living. It's trying to put food on the table, and it's how they put food on the table. So there are all these tensions that arise with the client. If in our society, we have mass reproduction, so you might hope to be a musician that puts out a hit record, and so you don't have a boss in that sense, but the record label is your boss. And so you're going to make compromises, and you're going to make strategic choices to reach your market. And as far as I can tell, that kind of dynamic has always been there. A sponsor, there was a time when all artists were sponsored by the royalty. The only artists were palace artists, courtly artists, in that sense. And they had to please the nobility, or they were done. It's just like being the court jester. You can be funny, but not too funny. You can be satirical, but not too satirical. So I got a lot out of that biography of Leonardo, who was one of the greatest geniuses of all time, and he was still always trying to please his patron.
Hold on, let me just interject really quick. Was that Leonard Schleine's book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Leonard, Clinton Leonard's the big guy who the goddess in the alphabet book, who he really milked McLuhan big time. He's a smart guy. He's a brain surgeon and a good writer and a good researcher.
Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely it did. Because of course, at the end of the day, Jerry's got a question. I don't think he brought out tonight, but it goes along the lines of, do you write for, is your art for you, or are you thinking of your audience when you create it?
Well, because I do not strive to be a commercial success. I would say my art is for myself and my circle. In other words, I really rely on live events with a live audience. And Jerry's familiar with the kind of singing circle I might have in my backyard, which is highly participatory. People take turns leading songs, but it's not a typical artist audience type of context. That's what's most important to me. And I knew an entertainment attorney in Boston back in the early 80s. He saw the show that I did about Henry David Thoreau's year at Walden. Mm-hmm. And he called me and said, I want to represent you. I think I can place this with PBS or a major record label, and let me shop it around. So I said, okay. And so he played it. Actually, he first played it for Rounder Records in Boston. And the head of Rounder Records said, not only does this have no commercial potential, it has no non-commercial potential. That's my sweet spot. I mean, that's just where I want to be. No non-commercial potential.
You're a rock and an island.
That's right.
A couple little quick interjects. That's Zapp actually put that. You have no commercial potential. In fact, they took Captain Beefheart's record to Herb Alpert, and Herb Alpert said the feedback on would be not healthy for my kids. The feedback on the guitar is not healthy for my kids. And one day I met Herb Alpert and I told him that, and he just cracked up. He loved hearing that there was a letter where he wrote that. But I know what Dillon. The competition at the Swans Island Sweet Chariot Music Festival is amazing because you got these 5 or 6 major songwriters, and they can write songs for 20, 30 years. But every year they're going, I'm going to be with my peer group. I might have to, or I'm a little more inspired to write a song because they're going to be writing a song. So I know there's some of that it's not mean-spirited or like heavy competition, but deep down there's some of that. Wow, you've got a song, I've got a new song too. So it's healthy, because otherwise, because these people aren't so much I'm making my living writing songs, that it is a one level of stimuli. Like I'm with my peer group. But one of the moments, Dillon, with you was just super fun for me. Was I said, Dillon, are you interested in your publishing on your songs? Because that's how songwriters can make money, publishing. No, I don't care about publishing. I goes, well, what about like paying for your son's college education? You got to raise funds for that. No. And then I've always going through your bookshelves looking for all your books. And there's a book that said How to Write a Hit Song. And I said, hey, I busted you. So, Clinton, you got another one, or are we? Okay, thank you. That was really good, Clinton. And it's actually, you asked a question that I didn't ask. But I did ask the one you thought I didn't ask. My question was worded a little different. And I love that because you gave me a way to word it differently. I usually say, like Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So is the culture or the technology the more dominant in the expression of the art, or is the self more dominant? Mm-hmm. So if you already sort of answered that, Dillon, but it's like one of our best examples was recently Miss Elliott, a famous female rapper, said, she said, I learned how to sing from car alarms. And that was an amazing example. Is like, she didn't go, I'm going to express myself, but I mean, it's such a combination. So Dillon, what's the healthiest, most impactful cultural shift you see developing today?
You know, I believe there is a trend for people to sign off of social media, to eschew Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and all the others. And for my own part, I think that's healthy. We all got a little intoxicated. Some got more drunk than others, but some people are trying to go sober. Social media is sober.
Really well put. That's like media fast, being without it. Yeah. So, Dillon, this has been highly enlightening. I appreciate it. I hope we can continue our discussions forever. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
My boys.
Yeah.
That's a very conventional answer.
Yeah.
That's a very conventional answer, I know, but and especially because at various times both of them have been pissed off at me for bringing them into the world.
Pissed off, man. I know. My favorite is your oldest, Andy, they're both dear people, and I consider them both friends. Andy's like, your hope, like, if I get this wrong, you correct me. Your hope was that he would follow your footsteps in being a folk musician or a musician, and he became a jock. And then day at the music festival where you're on stage and you're playing a Fish song with him. So you finally got your dream come true, sort of.
Well, I certainly didn't try to put any pressure on them to be musicians. I honestly didn't. I didn't have any expectation. But they're both very fine songwriters as well as guitar. And they both play the guitar better than I do, you know. Yeah.
Dillon, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and energy. This has been enlightening and truly enlightening. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thanks.
Good night.